We open in Kingston, 1976, to the rhythms of Get Up, Stand Up, and we really get to soak in this atmosphere and this environment and this lifestyle. We see the boys here going on their regime, their daily run that they did every morning into the hills and into the waterfalls. Exercise was a big part of their life and their religion. I love that the music here is allowed to play out for extended periods of time. They don't just partially play part of a chorus and move on. We get to hear big chunks of these songs, verse to chorus to verse to chorus. I think one of the best things about this film is that if it's able to expose Bob's music to new audiences, whether they be young or old, to introduce people to this history and this culture and this music here. They also did an interesting thing where the actor sometimes sung the songs in the context of writing them and jamming on them and slowly developing them, but when Bob was like performing on stage or even in the rehearsal room here, they just actually took Bob Marley's real life vocal tracks and what's his name? Kingsley Ben Adrid, sorry for the mispronunciation. Kingsley, he just lip sung to Bob Marley's tracks, which, you know, it makes sense when you're making like an Elvis biopic or a Johnny Cash biopic or a Bob Marley biopic. These people, they hold such relevance and such esteem still decades and decades after their career has been and done in musical history and just history in general, because they were one of a kind. I mean, there is only one Bob Marley. So for Kingsley to try and perform something that's unperformable, it's ridiculous. It's like, try to be as good as Bob Marley. It's impossible. There was only one Bob, and he was Bob for a reason. So it's kind of weird seeing him lip sync here, and it feels weird hearing Bob's voice not come from Bob. Obviously, you're so used to hearing it come from Bob. But I like this decision. I think it was a wise decision, and I think it works. Bob Marley was Bob Marley for a reason, and you can't replicate that. And Kingsley doing his best, he's a great singer, but he's no Bob Marley, and that's no shame to him. Nobody's no Bob Marley apart from Bob Marley. The assassination attempt on Bob Marley happens quite early on in this film. Rather than build to it as like a third act climax, it happens rather early in the first act and kind of sets the stakes for Bob's headspace and his exile and everything that was coming on after that, and it gives kind of the events more significance. You would think it'd be your classic third act climax, right? The shootout, but no, it's here. I have to say the historical accuracy of all the politicians on either side and the gang violence and the actual political movements that were happening and the laws and restrictions, it's historically accurate a lot. I mean, people always argue and nitpick about biopics and historical films about the historical accuracy, but you know, it's a narrative, and overall their main thing is to tell a good story. If something's 100% historically accurate and is not an entertaining tale that's not going to captivate anyone, then it doesn't mean anything and it's not going to do any good or spread the message. But here I think they walk a great line with a lot of historical accuracy and being able to tell a compelling story.
Here now is a special item of news. Entertainer and reggae star Bob Marley, Rita Marley, and the manager of the Wailers, Don Taylor, are now patients in the University Hospital after receiving gunshot wounds during a shooting incident tonight.
The gun violence is rather sudden. Rita gets shot in the driveway, saved only by her dreads, which is amazing. Jar was on her side, not allowing her to die because of her religious obligations and her lifestyle, and her dreadlocks was the only reason that she survived. Jar Rastafari. It was quite sudden and shocking, as it should have been, and then the movie just kind of moves on and doesn't touch on it a lot more. There were a lot of revelations in real life about the actual gun I think Bob said that he knew them. And I think at this point it's pretty fair to say, I think it was the LMP that were like coerced by possibly the CIA. I don't know. Maybe there's a definitive answer as to who did it, but at the time it was a mystery, and the movie just leaves it that way. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter who did it. It matters that they did it to Bob, and what matters is the concert that happened a couple days later and Bob's response that even though these gunmen were still on the loose and hadn't been captured and were trying to stop him from performing this benefit show, that he still went on stage bearing his wounds to the audience, where the bullets skimmed across his chest and where the bullets embedded in his elbow. That's what matters here. It's not who did it, it's who they did it to and how he responded. And it's one of the greatest hero responses of all time, right? It's like bearing his wounds in front of the audience. I love how they captured that moment in the film, mirroring the real footage of Bob opening his shirt and revealing his wounds to the Jamaican people. A true archetypical hero here. He survived a gun battle, and against the odds and against the threat of violence, you see the guy in the crowd aiming at him. It was obviously like a vision he had and a fear he had, but it didn't matter because music is good and music heals and music needs to be played to the people and this message needs to be sent. And Bob's life didn't mean anything if he couldn't spread the message of Rastafari.
About bearing his chest and showing his wounds. The crowd went up. I mean, what more Jamaican love than a man who had just survived a gunfight?
Yeah!
I think I would have liked more of Bob's early childhood in this film. Probably only like a little 10-minute sequence we need to really understand where he came from and what made him. We do get a lot of great flashback scenes to the Wailing Wailers and those early days with Lee Scratch Perry and their first producer, the gangster guy who holds him at gunpoint. I thought that was all great, and it did pay homage to those early beginnings in Jamaica when Bob was just 16. The Boys, Simmer Down, which is a fucking brilliant song, and I'm glad they included it here. But I would have liked maybe a bit more of that as well, maybe a bit more of his rise in Jamaica. But even before that, when he was childhood in Trenchtown, and like the starvation and the violence and the going to bed after a glass of water because that's all they had, and just seeing like the one set of clothes and these little shanties and things they were living in. I think if you just show a little 10-minute sequence of him and his mother really early on in Trenchtown, just struggling for food and struggling against the violence with no possessions and no future, I think that really would have painted more of a picture of who the man was and where he came from and how amazing it was where he ended up in the end.
A lot of people don't know, but Bob, me, we went to bed hungry a lot. I mean, real hungry. I don't mean like, oh, you had a little piece of this. Nothing. One of the famous lines was, drink some water and go to bed,
Obviously, a massive part of Bob's identity was his dreadlocks, and dreadlocks always seem hard to come off as realistic in films. They put a lot of money and effort into creating these things, I guess, but dreadlocks are years old and they've been through storms and oceans and drunken parties and rolled around and been covered in sand, and they're lived in and they have all this time into them. And the dreadlocks looked good. They looked good, and they did match Bob's dreads with reasonable accuracy. He wore several different versions of them. Going on later on, he had the longer ones when some of his two dreadlocks had combined into one big one, or have one big one that split into two. They did do stuff like that. But yeah, when you look at Bob's dreadlocks and you look at Kingsley's dreadlocks, obviously they look different. But they did a good job. They did a good job on the dreads. A B plus for the dreads. B plus for the dreads. Some movies fucking C minus, F for the dreads. House of the Dragon, that guy with the little tiny thin dreads, they don't look like dreads. They look terrible. These dreads look pretty good, man.
How important are the dreadlocks?
This?
Is that
This is
part
my
of being a
identity,
Rasta?
man. Yeah, this is my identity.
I've heard some criticisms of this film that it shied away from Bob's use of ganja. I don't think that's true. The guy was smoking a fucking spliff in every scene, and all these boys were smoking spliffs in every scene. I like the accuracy to all these band members too. They like cast actors to actually play all those individual band members. They weren't just like random extras. They got like a bass player that looked like Bob's bass player and so on and so on. Because they were, you know, characters in his narrative, even though they don't have a whole lot to do. Where was I going with this? Ganja! Yeah, they show a spiritual sequence early on for Rastafarians. Ganja was a spiritual thing. You became closer to God and closer to spiritualism whenever you smoked, and you could feel the presence of God. And they had a scene showing that. It cut from like Bob as a child being introduced into this new religion, and then it would cut from him as a child, him as a man, smoking, and with all the Rastafari leaders and their councils. It didn't sit you down and tell you all this if you don't know that ganja was a spiritual tool to Rastafarians. It didn't say that, but it showed a scene, and you should be able to understand that it had more of a significance than just doing drugs. So yeah, I think they had enough of the ganja in this movie. I mean, they had a whole scene of it and its spiritual significance. What else did you want? Like another scene where he's talking about, I love the ganja, man. I smoke the ganja every day, brother. And I get on it. Like, you know, he had a spliff in his hand in every scene.
Marijuana is illegal in Jamaica, but the Rastas say they smoke it because the Bible tells them to. The book of Revelation says to partake of the herd.
I think Kingsley Ben Adrid did an amazing job of playing Bob, his accent and his characteristics and cadence and body language, his dancing, his movements, his overall like messages. It was, yeah, a really brilliant performance and really accurate to Bob. Obviously he's different, but he was believable. And I sat down and I'm like, yeah, okay. It's not Bob Marley. It doesn't look quite like Bob Marley, but the guy's Bob Marley, and I was able to suspend my disbelief and go along with it. And I also thought all the themes and ideals and the message of the movie was on point. One of the producers is Ziggy Marley, and I think Rita Marley, and a couple of other family members and people from Jamaica, and I think, yeah, they really went out of their way to put Bob's messages and ideals and the themes of his story and what he was trying to tell the people here. Very accurate. Peace, love, happiness together, Jah, Rastafari, what's his name? The old guy that's the King of Kings. You know the guy.
Emperor Haile Selassie is the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. He's our God, Rasta God.
I think there's a version of this film where you could have made it more dramatic and more tense and possibly made a objectively better film. If you look at Walk the Line, a lot of that movie centers around Johnny Cash's drug addiction and his relationship with June Carter. I don't think Bob Marley was as troubled as Johnny Cash. I think Johnny Cash had a lot of demons and he struggled for a long time. Obviously Bob Marley had a lot of demons as well, but he seemed more at peace with himself. So there is a version of this movie which is more tense and more suspenseful and leans more into his relationship with the reader and their polyamorous nature and their jealousy and their different partners and their arguments, and you could lean into that and make a movie more like Walk the Line. There's a scene in Walk the Line where he's like arguing with his wife and he wrestles her to the ground and she's screaming, and then it cuts to like their kids watching him. You could have done a movie like that, maybe, but yeah, I think overall Bob was like, he was a heavy guy that was pressing a heavy message, but he was also very like fun and positive and upbeat and happy. So I think this movie plays true to who he was, his deeper messages, his darkness, his skeletons, his father. But yeah, also I think a Bob Marley movie shouldn't be that dark.
Just come to break down pressure. Rule equality, yeah. Wipe away transgression.
They do show Bob's father in this movie in like these dream sequences. They slowly reveal the dream sequences. It's this big spiritual thing. I thought that worked, and you see a piece more of the dream every time they show you it. And then eventually his father becomes Rastafarians. They believe that this guy, Haile Selassie, they believed he was the actual reincarnation of Jesus. He was the King of Kings. He was like God among us. He was some guy. It was like the leader of, I don't know, Uganda or something. It's interesting that they chose this guy. I don't know how they chose him, but yeah, Bob's father morphs into this man to say, you know, Bob never had a dad really, but this man, Haile Selassie and Rastafari and the religion, that was his fatherhood. So I liked all that. But once again, like Bob Marley, he was completely mixed race. His mother was full-blood Jamaican, and then his dad was just some white guy from England who knocked up his mum when she was like 16. I think he was in his 60s. Just some white English colonialist. And I think if we'd seen a bit more of that in the childhood, and they'd explored that. They did explore it a little bit, but maybe, yeah, come right out and be like, hey, the reason Bob was always preaching unity and togetherness was because he was these two different, completely separate cultures combined, and throughout his childhood he was an outcast and rejected by everyone. He wasn't black. The black people didn't accept him, and he wasn't white. The white people didn't accept him. So he was this true like outcast, and all that built into him becoming this great leader of unity and love and acceptance. His childhood completely and utterly molded him into the man he became.
My father's a white and my mother black. Now them call me half caste or whatever. Well, me don't dep on no bad side. Me don't dep on the black man's side nor the white man's side. Me dep on God's side. The man who created me, who caused me to come from black and white.
We do get this brilliant confrontation between Bob and Rita, and I think that's enough. You don't need more drama and more tension. They do, yeah, come head to head, and she talks about her sacrifices she made for him with her career and how she allowed him not to be faithful to her. She also wasn't faithful to him, but Bob had like 11 kids to 7 different women. And they do go into it, and I think that argument is enough. And I think that Kingsley, and I don't know the actress that played Rita, but I thought they did a brilliant job of acting here. Their accents were spot on, and the drama was great, and the intensity and the sadness and the emotion and the anger. It was a brilliant scene, enough.
How did you cope through all the years that you were married together and Bob was having these relationships with other women?
I became his guardian angel. By that time, I was past the surface of being just a wife because of the importance of who I knew Bob is. I didn't see it as a fun trip. We were on a mission. It was like an evangelist campaign to bring people closer to Jah.
Obviously, there was a lot more that went into the initial injury of Bob's toe. I believe his toenail was completely ripped off by spike boots while playing soccer. Someone stood on his toe. And he had this melanoma, and because of the melanoma, his toe wouldn't heal. Now this went on for ages, and they forgot about it. And the cancer was detected. They wanted to remove the toe. Bob did not want to get the toe removed. He got some terrible advice from some terrible fucking doctors who said he didn't need to get it removed. He could just get part of the top bed removed. But yeah, Bob was worried that he wouldn't be able to play soccer or dance anymore if he had his toe removed. Look, I get it, but fucking sucks, yo. There was a lot that the movie didn't show, but that's good, that's fine. There's this brilliant documentary called Marley, I think released in 2012, and that goes more into it. And look, it just fucking sucks, man. The guy was a brilliant genius, and he just slowly died of cancer, and it fucking sucked. He ended up having like a stroke on one side, and he couldn't play guitar with his fretting hand, and it's hard to watch that in the documentary. And it would have been hard to watch it in the film, and they cut a lot of it out, and they simplified a lot of it out. But that's fine, because I don't want to watch fucking Bob Marley die of cancer. That fucking sucks, and I fucking hate it. I want to watch the guy telling his story, and on stage, and at full power, preaching to the people with his brilliant voice and his crazy, beautiful music. So I don't have any qualms with them simplifying and cutting down his illness and him dying. It happened. If you want to read up about the details, you can, but look, I got sad. I felt sad at the end. Maybe that's only because I'm a Bob Marley fan. Maybe if you weren't a Bob Marley fan, I don't know if the movie would have moved you into sadness and melancholy, but I did get there eventually, and yeah, we didn't need any more. I don't need this to be historically accurate. I don't need to see Bob dying in fucking Germany or wasting away in intensive care as his kids gather around him. Fuck cancer, yo.
Triumphantly, we all must sing. All must sing.
The climax of the film kinda is the cancer diagnosis, but before that we get the big Africa show. The people of Jamaica were exiled, taken from Africa and shipped out as slaves to Jamaica. I think it was the Dutch maybe, and then they just left them, and Jamaica developed its own culture and identity through isolation, which is fascinating. So yeah, Rastafarians have this image of their home world and their homeland, their home people, Africa, it's where they come from. So there's a massive religious context there and meaning, and Bob always wanted to go back to Africa and play there, so we get building up to that and the significance, and his manager Dom skimming off the top. In real life, they interrogated him for hours and held him out of like a 20-store floor window, and they recorded everything he said, and Bob would make him repeat it again and again, and if he didn't say the same facts again, they'd rewind the tape and be like, look, you're lying, last time you said this, and Bob would fucking smack him around. In the movie, Bob just beats the shit out of him, but that's fine. We get the picture. Bob cared about Africa, and don't fuck with Africa. In conclusion, as a Bob Marley fan, I really enjoyed this movie. I think they could have added more into it. I think it was only an hour and 40 minutes without the credits. I loved at the end, by the way, where they played real footage of Bob and interview clips and whatnot. That was amazing. But yeah, I feel like you could have added more on at the beginning, him as childhood, living in poverty and just trying to survive in Jamaica. But other than that, I mean, all the musical sequences were amazing, historically accurate. You know, it's a biopic. It's close enough. It's trying to tell Bob's story, and that's what it did. It doesn't matter if some of the facts weren't there. It was good. I enjoyed it. It was a good movie, a really good movie. Not a great movie, not a brilliant movie. It wasn't the best movie ever. I think Walk the Line still remains one of the greatest biopics of all time. It doesn't quite meet that threshold, but it's close. It's quite good. It's quite good. B++++++. Alright, thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and in the comments, Ja Rastafari.